In this video, we will be covering some of the most terrifying, interesting, incredible creatures, myths, anomalies, and mysteries of the ocean. And believe me, this stuff gets insane. Before I started this iceberg, I thought that I knew about the ocean, but my god was I wrong. There are so many wild, mind-blowing, terrifying entries and topics in this iceberg that by the time I was done with it, I had a new and renewed fear of the ocean, which... thanks, internet. I am really excited to cover this one, so without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is seawater, and join me as we explore the ultimate ocean iceberg. Tier 1. More than 80% of the ocean is unexplored. So this one, in my eyes, is one of the reasons why the ocean is so damn terrifying. The ocean covers roughly 70% of the planet, and roughly 80% of the ocean is just completely unexplored. We've explored the surface levels, well enough, but the deeper you go, the less and less we've explored it. And there are a lot of areas where we are just tragically unaware of what is actually down there. We have obviously done some deep sea dives and explorations and like probes and expeditions sort of thing, but they are just really limited in their scale. They're difficult to do, they're expensive, everything is just dark, and the pressure down there is just insane. It's just a nightmare. So we obviously can't explore that area as well as we can explore the surface level. And I mean, just think about how difficult it is for us to find lost ships out at sea. We spend days and weeks using boats and planes and echolocators and everything, and sometimes we don't even find the ship. And this ship, a lot of the time, is just on the surface level. So imagine that multiplied by like 1,000 or 10,000 times or whatever, because you're adding in the depth of the ocean as well. And we are pretty sure that there are many undiscovered species and creatures down there, way down at the bottom of the ocean, but we really have no idea how many there are, what they look like, how they behave, or what their maybe new traits or abilities are. It is kind of like a new frontier, and so it may very well be full of these ancient, giant, terrifying deep sea beasts. I mean, potentially. Or, just another flavor of squid. Atlantis. So Atlantis is a super fascinating one that I think a lot of people out there have probably heard about. It was this fictional island that was written about in Greek times by the philosopher Plato that was said to have this enormous, powerful navy, and with that navy it ruled most of the Western world. And then it tried to conquer Athens, and the gods frowned upon this, and so as punishment they sunk the island to the bottom of the ocean. And there were basically two schools of thought on Atlantis. One, that Atlantis was basically a story, like a fictional island, a fictional nation that never really existed, and Plato just invented it in order to tell a story and to teach a lesson. Or two, that it was actually a real place and potentially had some quite advanced technology for its time, and that it then sunk either down to the gods or down to natural causes. Now, if you're in the first school of thought, there's not really much to do about this. If you believe it's a fictional island, it's like great sort of thing. Just learn about the lore of the island, and it's kind of an interesting story, but there's not much you have to do. But if you are in the second school of thought and you believe that Atlantis at least at one point existed, then there's an island to find. And a lot of people do believe this and have gone out looking for Atlantis. But the question is, where do you even look? Well, the island was said to be somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and there have naturally been countless dives and explorations and deep sea searches, all looking for evidence of this lost civilization. And what they found is questionable at best, but this hasn't stopped people from going back to the drawing board, essentially. Going through Plato's writings, trying to decipher and find clues about where exactly it might be, and about what type of civilization they might be, and all sorts of things. It's kind of like a detective story. And then researching how islands actually sink and seeing if they can find any evidence in the ocean about lost artifacts or structures or structure-like things that might be linked to Atlantis. It really is like one big treasure hunt. And we do have some genuine examples of islands sinking and disappearing over the years. And a few of the best ones we actually cover further down in this iceberg. But for now, it seems like Atlantis didn't really exist until Plato wrote about it. There's no official records of Atlantis, there's no other references to Atlantis before Plato first wrote about it, and there isn't really any other official written or physical evidence for Atlantis. So it looks a little slim, but let me know your thoughts on this one. But I do think, real or not real, history or simply a myth, it is still a really cool story and topic and idea to think about. The Kraken is a giant, legendary squid octopus-like creature, which honestly might be more likely real than you might think. It was first described in the 1700s, but ideas and sightings of this go way back. The name Kraken comes from the Norse word krake, meaning malformed or overgrown tree. And I'm just going to put it out there that a bunch of these words are obviously Old Norse, and I'm probably going to mispronounce a few of them, but I am doing my best. And so krake comes from the Old Norse word kraki or kraki, which comes from croaker, meaning hook or crook. And we actually get the words hook and crook from croaker. And we also get the word crab from croaker, funnily enough, because a crab is like a giant misformed tree or something. So it was named the Kraken because, as you can see, as it is depicted, it kind of looks like an overgrown or crooked tree. It's got the main solid trunk in the middle with these crazy wild arms or branches like flailing everywhere. And it is also, as I mentioned earlier, maybe not that far off reality. It's really just a massive, ginormous squid, like when you get right down to it. And the thing is, we have really big squids already. I mean, not as big as the Kraken, mind you, but we have giant squids and colossal squids, both huge, rare sea creatures that live deep down in the mostly unexplored ocean depths. Like, you wouldn't need some alien or monstrous explanation for this, as it would just be something we already have, a giant squid, but just like a gianter squid. I mean, yes, the Kraken is a lot bigger than a giant squid, but could an extra large squid of ancient times, of an ancient species, live somewhere down in the deep, dark, unexplored depths of the ocean, live for thousands of years, and just come up every now and then to attack ships and to feed, and then head back down into the darkness to sleep? I think absolutely it could. And that is a terrifying thought. Mermaids, half maid and half mer. Now, these creatures appear in mythologies all around the world, from European to Norse to Asian to African, and are often, but not always, conflated with sirens. Now, sirens actually originally come from Homer's Odyssey, and were these human-like beings who lived out on an island on the Western Sea. They would seduce and sing to sailors, cause them to be entranced, and cause them to crash their own ships into a bunch of rocky outcrops, and die a cold, oceany death. So, not very fun. And Homer didn't really provide a physical description for these creatures, so their appearance was kind of open to interpretation. And because of this, later writers in ancient Greece often wrote of sirens and described them as being half human and half bird. And it was only later, when Christian influence came into the picture, and especially in modern times, that sirens and mermaids started to be written as kind of the same creature, and both took on the now common appearance of being half fish and half human. Mermaids were traditionally very gentle, somewhat naive, innocent, beautiful, and maybe slightly mischievous creatures, but nothing really approaching evil. But sirens typically had the outward appearance of innocence and beauty, etc., but would actually be vicious and deadly in their encounters with men, and would lure them in with beauty and with singing, crashing their ships and devouring them. So I guess with sirens being changed to look more like mermaids over the years, people also began to confuse them and to combine their characteristics into one creature. A beautiful half woman, half fish creature that looks innocent and naive and lures men in with their song, and is sometimes evil and doing it for ulterior motives, and sometimes innocent and playful. So it's become a bit of a strange mix of the two. And there are some fringe theories out there, one of which I covered in my Apocalypse Iceberg, but one says that mermaids are just aquatic alien parasites that are latched onto the bottom of these beautiful women, and the human woman that you see above the water is basically dead and is controlled entirely by the alien under the water, which is obviously attached to its legs and has the appearance of, you know, like a flipper. So that's where we apparently get the description from. But that is a theory for another day and another iceberg. The Bermuda Triangle is an area of ocean in the North Atlantic that spans from Florida to Puerto Rico to Bermuda. And boy, does it have its fair share of mysterious, spooky allure. So also known as the Devil's Triangle, because of course it is. The Bermuda Triangle was first invented, discovered, discussed in the 1950s as an area in which a suspicious amount of planes and boats go missing. There were a bunch of planes and ships and boats that went missing over the years, and so they obviously started to discuss this idea. And then in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, people just noticed more and more and more of them going missing, and so the Bermuda Triangle became this like super popular, widespread phenomenon and idea and conspiracy. So then people, as they tend to do, started to look for an explanation for all of these disappearances. And this is where the fun starts. There are some people that say that the disappearances are caused by the lost city of Atlantis. They say that some of the lost, ancient, super advanced tech from Atlantis is still buried at the bottom of the ocean and somehow interferes with ships and boats and planes and causes them to crash. Or that the people of Atlantis are still alive in some way. Either, you know, they've made like a colony underneath the water, or somehow they can like breathe underwater now, and they don't like the fact that we are like traveling around them and traveling in the ocean, and so they use their, again, super advanced technology and or weapons to, you know, take down several ships and boats and planes from all the way down at the bottom of the ocean. There's theories that say that there is some sort of space-time or rip in the Bermuda Triangle, and that these ships and planes are being basically transported to another dimension or to an alternate timeline. Some say that there are just massive magnetic anomalies around the Bermuda Triangle, which causes like the compasses in the planes and the ships to just go haywire, messes up with the tracking and all that. And some say that it's just down to natural storms and typhoons in the area. We don't really know what causes these disappearances, and I honestly just went over like a few of the theories. There are so many interesting and wild theories and ideas out there that we might cover in a future standalone episode. The Megalodon is a giant, real-life, extinct species of shark. It died out around 3 or 4 million years ago, and its size was honestly a lottle terrifying. This is it in comparison to a great white shark, and this is one of its teeth in comparison to a great white shark tooth. And do you see why people hate the ocean? Like, great whites are probably the most well-known, most feared creature in the modern ocean, and yet just a short while ago there were these huge bloody things creeping around there, all wet and oceany. I don't know what sound sharks make. Probably not that, but whatever. But who's to say that these are fully extinct? And who's to say that there's not the odd one left that's still floating around down there? Or another giant extinct sea creature that is maybe not so extinct. The ocean is full of possibilities. Unfortunately, those possibilities are nightmares. And speaking of nightmares, we have thalassophobia, which is the fear of oceans, of lakes, of seas, basically any large body of water, which, I mean, that's completely rational, no? Well, thalassophobia, to be fair, is a little more extreme than just thinking the oceans are terrifying. It comes with like dizziness, sweating, throwing up, breathlessness, and a sense of imminent doom, which I don't even know how that's an official symptom, but it is, I guess. But all of these symptoms occur whenever you approach or sometimes even see a large body of water. We don't know exactly how many people suffer worldwide from thalassophobia, but it's one of those phobias that I can totally get on board with, as opposed to something stupid like a paperclip phobia or something. Old sea monsters. So this entry is super interesting. It refers to these sea creatures and monsters often depicted on these old maps from around the world. Some are drawn really quite beautifully, and there are a ton of ones either documented or imagined out there, so I'll just go through a few of the more interesting ones. The Styperida was this creature. Kind of ugly looking, but it was a good creature that often would help fight off larger, more dangerous creatures, and in turn save the fishermen. Thanks, Stiperodor. The Jasconius was this large sea creature that St. Brendan was actually said to have landed his ship on before realizing that, wait a minute, this isn't land. This is a giant sea creature, which it happens to the best of us, Brendan. The sea eagle was this fucking monstrosity. Like, I mean, just look at it. Ugh. But if you actually managed to catch one of these and bring it to a king, you would be rewarded quite handsomely. Don't ask me why, it's just tradition, I guess. The sea chimera is a super strange and cool one. Its face is almost like a bird-fish hybrid with feathers, and its bottom half is snake-like and scaly. Oh, and it also shoots smoke out of its head, and its tail is on fire. Super cool. The cherub seals were these large, scaly seals with human child faces. They were hunted by the fearsome Xiphias, which was this beaked, wolf-like ocean predator. Both of them are fearsome and scary. Both of them are creepy. Just one is more terrifying than the other. And I won't say which one. The elephant fish was just one creature of many, theorized to exist in the 1100s Switzerland, as they believed at the time that every land creature, every single one, tigers, monkeys, elephants, giraffes, all had their counterpart sea creature, and hence elephant fish. It looks a little absurd, but what the hell. The sea bishop is... this is just getting silly now. This was in the 1500s, and there was rumored to be an underwater kingdom of extremely devout Catholic sea people. So naturally, in this kingdom, you would need sea bishops. Moving on. The sea swine is exactly what it sounds like, sort of. A swine-like creature with tusks and dragon's feet, and just for good measure, eyes just placed randomly around its body, apparently. I think they were just running out of ideas on these ones. All these creatures' characteristics are probably a result of a lack of knowledge of the ocean. There are a ton more of these wacky, unusual sea creatures, and they're all pretty cool in their own way, and would honestly fit right into a fantasy D&D sort of setting, and their characteristics are probably a result of exploration of the unknown, with limited or no scientific tools, poor visibility, fear, panic, myth, rumors, legends, and I think that maybe a few were even created deliberately in order to, spice up the decorations on the maps and to sell more maps, or potentially even just in a fantasy artistic sort of way. And I mean, when you think about it, if you were a sailor in those days and you would go off for years in these random, unexplored, uncharted parts of the world, it's pretty cool to come back and say, like, yeah, I fought a 100-foot antelope squid or something, and yeah, it attacked the boat and killed a few people, but I, fought it off with my bare hands like a real man. And I mean, honestly, in those days, who would be able to disprove you? Stories like that probably passed around quite a bit. The people on land started to believe them. The people out at sea probably heard stories that other people had made up, and so imprinted those ideas onto new and unexplainable things that they witnessed, and it just kept the cycle going round and round. But either way, super cool creatures of a kind of wacky era. Tier 2, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So this one is kind of depressing. It is this huge, or rather two huge collections of garbage in the Pacific Ocean. What generally happens is garbage ends up in the ocean somehow, whether by falling off ships or being dumped there, etc. And it doesn't get collected, but rather follows the natural flows of the ocean and then ends up gathering all into one or two big piles, and these just stay there for apparently all eternity. The Pacific Ocean has two main patches, with also a bunch of smaller ones scattered around, and so do most of the world's oceans, like the Northern and Southern Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. Kind of a sad state of affairs, and something should honestly be done to clean them up, but for now they are just as garbagey as ever. Green flash. So green flashes are a phenomenon that, while not technically limited to the ocean, ocean are easier to see over an ocean or sea. And this is when watching a sunset or sunrise, you can sometimes see just when the sun is perfectly on the horizon. Only for about 2 seconds, you can sometimes see a green flash of light. And the conditions for this to appear are very, very specific. And so it only happens really quite rarely, but they are caused by the sun's light at the perfect moment refracting, causing all the colors to be separated from one another. And for whatever reason, the green just happens to travel more easily in these conditions. And so that is the only light we see, and it appears as a green flash. Pretty cool, and something I would probably definitely want to witness at least one time in my life. The Loch Ness Monster. So this is probably the most famous sea creature in the entire world, I'd guess. Or rather, lake creature or loch creature. This monster is said to inhabit the Loch Ness. And a loch is just a lake, basically. But the Loch Ness is one of Britain's largest and deepest lakes, which is a perfect home for a super mysterious, elusive sea creature. This is typically what the creature looks like. This is from people who have apparently witnessed it, or taken photographs of it, or just imagined how it might look like. It kind of resembles something like a plesiosaur, a creature that lived around 200 million years ago. And there have been many, many theories about the creature just being an undiscovered lost species, or some type of mythical beast, or just simply a hoax. It could be part of a small family of plesiosaurs that never went extinct, and just made the Loch Ness their home. And to be fair, there have been pretty wide and deep searches of the Loch Ness done, and none of them have found or turned up the monster. But the loch itself is connected to the ocean via the river Ness. So I think there is no reason why it can't mostly live in the ocean, in, you know, part of that unexplored 80% we were talking about, and then occasionally make its way down the river and then into the loch for either breeding or giving birth, or just as like a change of scenery. This might explain why it is very elusive and we weren't able to find it in searches of the loch, and it is a pretty cool popular cryptid. The Milky Sea Phenomenon. So this is this gorgeous white glowing froth that has been observed as far back as, well, as far back as there have been oceans, really. Now, while all these images are luminescent bluish green, when you're on a boat at a certain time of night at a certain angle, these can look more glowy and white, hence the name Milky Sea. It has been described quite poetically, I think, in the past, hundreds of years ago, as plowing through white molten lead, or as sailing through a field of snow. But either way, blue, white, milky, luminescent. This phenomenon is caused by billions and trillions of these tiny bioluminescent bacteria, all gathering in certain areas at certain times, and transforming the sea that they're in into these gorgeous cold baths of glowing light. So nothing supernatural as far as we can tell, but still an incredible and beautiful phenomenon. The bloop was something I actually covered in my recent Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. And I'm just going to get it out of the way now that there are a few of these sound type entries in this iceberg that I will just group together here and go over them a little bit. They're all mysterious, they're all unique, they're all basically unknown, but I think they're better done in one grouping as opposed to just repeating myself and spreading them out over the entire iceberg. And the bloop was this super loud noise, louder than any whale or shark or any sea creature that we've ever heard before. And it was detected by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, or NOAA for short, in 1997. Now, there are a few reasons why this bloop was so unusual. Firstly, because the pattern of it, the signature, was really quite rapid, which is kind of similar in style to ocean creatures. So sharks, whales, all that sort of thing. But the sheer volume of the sound was, as I said, louder than anything we have heard before. Different people have come up with different theories as to what it might have been, from ice ridges or icebergs rubbing against each other or smashing into each other, or something known as an ice quake, or it could be, hear me out, it could be the rumblings, the tossing and turnings of a giant, ancient, long forgotten, terrifying, massive sea creature. It It could certainly be, and you can't convince me otherwise. But we also have a few other strange and unusual sounds heard over the years that are obviously included in this iceberg, and that I will play for you now. We have Julia, Upsweep, Train, and the 1997 whistle sound. All very unusual sounds, all for the most part unexplained, and all simple reminders of just how unknown and terrifying the ocean is. The Titanic. I mean, I guess I kind of asked for this one with all the icebergs that I've been doing, but obviously most everyone will know the general story about the Titanic, so I won't bore anyone with that, but I will cover some of the more interesting facts and theories about the Titanic, and cover some things that people maybe don't know about it. Quick introduction to the Titanic. Big ship, sailed from Europe to America, except it didn't make it because while it was in the ocean traveling, they spotted an iceberg up ahead, tried to steer out of the way of it, ended up smashing into it, and then the entire ship sank. Firstly, the Titanic only carried enough lifeboats for half of the people on board, which it's just, why would that ever be necessary? Like, surely you'd either take no lifeboats or enough lifeboats to save everyone on board. Like, when would you ever need to save exactly half of the people? And after the sinking of the Titanic, that's exactly what ships were forced to do, to take with them enough lifeboats for every single person on board. But in the case of the Titanic, the lifeboats wouldn't have really even made a difference. The last lifeboats that they used were literally just pushed off onto the water at the last second, just before the ship went down. The sinking of the ship happened so fast that even if they had carried more lifeboats, they likely wouldn't have been able to use them in time. 80% of the male passengers on the Titanic died, and this is just 80% across the board, across all of the classes, and just 25% of all female passengers died. 76% of all crew members died, and 39, 58, and 76% of the first, second, and third class passengers all died. The Titanic itself housed a bunch of really cool, innovative things like squash courts, gyms, and actually the very first swimming pool. Not like the first one ever, but the first one on a ship. Then there's the idea that in steering away from the iceberg, the ship kind of actually sealed its own fate. And this is because it tried to turn away from the iceberg, but it still kind of clipped the underside of it. So it was heading directly for it, and instead of missing it, the ship basically ripped its whole underside on one side, and this led to rapid flooding through this giant gaping hole and the eventual sinking of the ship. And there are theories that say if the ship had actually just smashed head on into the iceberg, like it would be a massive crash obviously, and the ship would be like crumpled and deformed, but that it would still be seaworthy, and so it may very well not have even sank. It was a massive ship that was kind of designed to take a bit of a beating, and so this counterintuitive move may have saved the ship and may have saved countless lives, but there's no super reliable way to tell. And then there are the conspiracy theories. The good stuff. There's one that says the Titanic never even sank, and that the owners of the ship instead disguised the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, and sent her out on this voyage. And this was apparently as part of like an insurance scam, where they'd, sink the sister ship, claim it was the Titanic, and then get paid the insurance of the Titanic, which I think is a nutso theory. And another theory says that JP Morgan himself actually sunk the ship, which is honestly not as crazy as it at first sounds. This was apparently part insurance fraud and part a way to kill these three very wealthy men that were on board. And these men apparently stood in opposition of JP Morgan founding the US Central Bank. JP Morgan had actually planned to be on the Titanic to, amongst other things, discuss business with these three men: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. But he actually cancelled cancelled at the last second, basically leaving the 3 men on board the Titanic for the voyage, while he stayed in Europe. He was trying to push through the creation of the US Central Bank, and these 3 men were kind of in his way. So did he do what he thought he needed to do? Who knows? But what's interesting is he did actually own the International Mercantile Marine, and they owned White Star Line, which owned the Titanic. So he basically owned the Titanic, and he could probably find out any and all information that he wanted about it. And then there's the further theory, which this one is just getting a little insane now, that says that the sinking of the Ocean Gate submarine was done on purpose by the JP Morgan Bank, I guess, to keep the passengers from seeing parts of the Titanic. That would reveal that the Titanic was sunk by a controlled demolition, which the internet is a wild place. But hopefully you learned a thing or two from this entry, and rest in peace to all of the beautiful souls that died on that day. Tsunami. So a tsunami is a series of often giant waves caused by a whole range of things, from earthquakes underneath the ocean, to volcanic eruptions, to meteors, to even man-made things like dropping bombs in the ocean. These can be extremely devastating, as we saw in 2004 with the Indian Ocean tsunami. It was extremely brutal and one of the most deadly natural disasters in human history, occurring only 20 years ago and killing roughly 230,000 people. This was over the span of 14 different countries in really just a few hours. So yeah, some terrifying stuff. Tsunamis are often quite subtle and even invisible out in the deep ocean, but once they eventually flow into more shallow waters, the waves pile up and grow taller and taller, and then once they hit land, you get immense devastation. So what can be done to stop these? And the answer is honestly not much. In tsunami-prone countries and areas like, say, Japan, there have been some measures invented and built in order to try and mitigate tsunamis and their damages, but these don't really help too much for especially the more extreme tsunamis. The town of Ayone, for example, was completely surrounded by these tsunami walls, but the 1993 tsunami created waves that were 100 feet tall, which is as tall as a 10-foot story building, and eventually they flowed over the walls, causing massive damage anyway, just as if there had been no walls there in the first place. So yeah, even without monsters, without mythical creatures or beings, the ocean is still a force to be reckoned with, and it is terrifying all on its own. Tier 3, the Osborne Reef. So this was this huge artificial reef made with rubber tires off the coast of Florida, and it was, to put it lightly, a massive failure. This was in the 1970s, and the idea was to basically kill 2 birds with 1 stone, in that they could get rid of a bunch of their old tires, while at the same time creating this lovely artificial reef along the coastline, which would help house and bring in a ton of fishes and little sea critters. At least this was how it should have worked in theory. There were over 2 million tires dumped into the sea, and this covered over 36 acres, with most of them being bound together with these steel clips. But this whole thing was done really quite sloppily, and for one, these steel clips weren't really checked too well for quality, and so they broke down and corroded and came apart after just a few years. This turned this massive collection and chunk of tires into just millions of individual tires that now all started to flow and be pushed around by the ocean and the tides and the waves, and so they could no longer act as a permanent home to any fishes. So there were just millions of tires just floating around down there, and they weren't even doing the job that they were originally put down there for. So yeah, fantastic idea. And so after 30 years of polluting the ocean with these, the government decided to finally admit their mistake and worked on cleaning out the reef, grabbing up as many of these tires as they could, and disposing of them properly. They've poured in millions of dollars into collecting these tires, and they currently have around 1/3 to 1/2 of them pulled out of the ocean, but there's still quite a way to go to reverse this probably well-intentioned but ill-designed project. The Lake of Despair is this fascinating underwater lake, which Yeah, kind of like SpongeBob, an ocean under an ocean. This is sometimes called the hot tub of despair or the hot tub brine machine, as the water in this underwater pool is a fair bit warmer than the surrounding water, and it is basically a super dense pool at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico where this super salty and toxic brine has developed. And this brine is heavier and denser and 4 times saltier than seawater, which means it just sinks down to the bottom and gathers in this pool and doesn't really mix with any of the surrounding water. The brine also contains some quite toxic components like hydrogen sulfide and methane, and so when an unsuspecting crab or fish or whatever just cruise on by, they can sometimes fall into or around this pool and just basically instantly die. And because the lake has so much salt in it, it basically just preserves the body of whatever fell in for all eternity, or at least until we, reach in and grab things out of it to examine. A pretty creepy one, like this evil salty pool way down at the bottom of the ocean. Pretty creepy, but pretty cool. Kaz II was a boat that was found drifting almost 100 miles off the coast of Australia in 2007. The boat took off from Australia around a week before it was found, and it was manned by 3 men, Derek Batten and Peter and James Tunstead. They had just planned to go out, spend a few days on the water, enjoy themselves, and then come back. But when the boat was eventually found, none of the 3 men were anywhere to be seen. The circumstances surrounding this one were very, very strange, as it wasn't as if they just come into a storm which knocked everyone overboard or even destroyed the boat. Although the men were missing, there was food and plates and knives and forks and stuff still on the table, laid out as if they were just about to eat a meal. There was a laptop on the table, still actually open and turned on. The engine was running, none of the lifeboats had been taken or used, and all of the emergency systems such as the GPS and radio were still up and running. So what could have been so intense that it knocked the men off apparently into the ocean, while at the same time being so mild that it left the laptop and food and cutlery all undisturbed? And that is honestly a very good question. There are theories and explanations that say that basically the 3 men were out of their depths, that they were unexperienced and got too close to the edge and ended up just all falling overboard, or that the Kaz II was boarded by someone or something. The fenders, these little things on the boat, were out when the boat was found. So people then thought that maybe they had been hooked up to another boat in order for this other boat to board them. And then the 3 men might have been taken or killed, or any number of things. Maybe the men saw something that they shouldn't have seen and had to be disappeared. There was a bit of a suspicious kind of vibe going on with the boat that found the Kaz II, and a ship that encountered the Kaz II a few days before it was actually found was also a little bit suspicious. They kind of changed their stories a little bit about the interactions they had, but that was never really investigated in depth, so it's unlikely that we'll ever know really for sure what happened on that day and what happened to these 3 men. Submechanophobia is the fear of submerged man-made items. So this is things like statues, sunken ships, basically anything man-made under the water. This is a very specific particular phobia, and it's unclear how many people exactly suffer from it and what causes it to develop. This isn't a fear of the open waters or ocean, or of sharks, or of whales, or of sea creatures, or even of things being submerged, but specifically of man-made inanimate things, things that aren't alive, being submerged under the water or ocean. And seeing things like this causes the person to start getting dizzy, to start panicking, and just not have a good time. So, a bit unusual, but this phobia does exist. Thankfully, in not too many people, but still some. Rogue waves are these random, giant, unpredictable waves that can suddenly appear out of nowhere and destroy ships and towns and cities. I mean, not just those things in particular, but it just destroys things in general. Now, these aren't to be confused with tsunamis, which are hardly even noticeable in deep waters, whereas with rogue waves, they are very noticeable in deep waters, often leading to the sudden and violent sinking of ships and boats. boats. It is thought that what causes these? Well, there's a whole range of theorized causes, but one of them is the fact that waves often travel at different speeds. So when you have a large slow wave up at the front and a bunch of faster waves constantly hitting into the wave, it kind of powers it up and makes it bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you get this giant wave just washing over everything, and yeah, that's a rogue wave. And honestly, I don't know how sailors do it, or at least did it back in the day, on these wooden ships out in the middle of the sea with no technology, not even a gyroscope on board to help kind of keep the ship balanced a little bit. And I can totally see why a bunch of them ended up becoming pirates. The Mary Celeste was another ship that went missing in mysterious circumstances. It set sail with 10 people aboard on November 7th, 1872, and was found adrift and apparently deserted in the Atlantic Ocean almost 2 months later. The ship seemed a little beaten and bruised, and it was under partial sail, but her lifeboat was missing and none of the crew were anywhere to be seen. So perhaps the crew just left on the lifeboat, but it's not really clear why they would. The ship was still in seaworthy condition, so it seems very unlikely that they would leave the main ship for this rickety old lifeboat, and the crew and the lifeboat were never found. So if they did all for some reason get into the lifeboat and go somewhere for some reason, where did they even go? Or perhaps another theory was that the ship was attacked and ransacked by maybe something like pirates. You know, they attacked them, they came on board, and then maybe they forced everyone off the ship and then into the waters. But if that's the case, why didn't the pirates take the ship itself? And if they did leave the ship, perhaps the most convincing argument against this is that they didn't take the cargo that the Celeste was carrying, which was 1,700 barrels of alcohol, all ripe for the taking and all left in the base of the ship. So who, aside from, say, pirates and the crew in some odd circumstances, might have benefited from this incident? Well, to explore that, we have to quickly mention something called the Law of Salvage, which rewards a person or group who finds a boat out in the ocean and brings it safely to a harbor. A court hearing is set up, a reward is determined, and the reward most of the time is based on the value of the ship, on the value of the cargo, how much damage was done to the ship, whether they saved the people on board or not. So it's a pretty cool law that actually discourages sailors from just completely ransacking every boat that they find, and actually allows them to get some of the value of the ship, while also saving people in a completely above board and legal manner. And that is exactly what happened in this particular case. But there was actually a lot of pushback against rewarding the people who found the ship with any of the ship's value at all. And this was just because of apparently how suspicious and strange the whole thing was. There were multiple accusations of foul play and murder and plundering and even insurance fraud, so that eventually when the reward was actually given out, it was around a third of what you actually might expect from a ship and cargo of this value. And there's the fact that the ship was massively overinsured, hence all the theories that the ship's captain had overinsured the ship, then abandoned the ship and had the insurance money collected through a third party, and then just changed his name and lived halfway around the world sort of thing, which there are a lot of theories for this one, as it's honestly just a really weird set of circumstances that raised a lot of suspicion, especially at the time. But seeing as this was a good 150 years ago, it's unlikely that we will ever get a definitive answer. Eels. So believe it or not, eels, these slithery little sea snakes, are incredibly mysterious creatures, and the main mystery surrounding them is just how and where they are born. So even to this day, we have never observed eels being born or mating in the wild, like ever. It was thought long ago that eels were just built differently, I guess, and didn't have to mate in order to reproduce, but just like came up from the depths and the muds of rivers, like bloody orcs or something. Or that adult eels would rub up against riverbeds and would break off parts of themselves, and then these small parts would become baby eels essentially, and then the cycle would then continue. Both pretty wild and insane ideas, I know, but at the time that's kind of all they really had. Then later it was found that eels would go to the sea to reproduce, somewhere, somehow. When they were mature, they would leave all of their rivers, head out into the sea, and then a while later, baby eels would just like swim towards the shore. But no one knew how or where this took place. So over the years, with more and more eel research, they tracked younger and younger and younger eels, getting closer and closer to their spawn point, I guess, and they eventually found it in a place called the Sargasso Sea. Every single eel in Europe and the Americas was born in this area. No matter where these eels are when they become mature, they will travel up and down rivers, over water and land. Yes, eels can at least partially travel on land. They will find their way somehow to the ocean, and from there begin the multi-year journey to the Sargasso Sea. And while they're here, they basically reproduce and then dissolve their stomachs and die. So yeah, they don't make it back. But the baby eels do. And we're still not really sure how the eels sense where they are. Like, they're able to navigate from basically any river out into the ocean, and then from the ocean, they're able to swim directly to the Sargasso Sea and continue the cycle. We're not sure if it's magnetic in nature or chemical or to do with the varying temperatures or something. So a pretty wild animal and species. And there is still a ton of mystery surrounding their anatomy and their habits. And the Sargasso Sea is in where else but the Bermuda Triangle. So these strange, creepy snakefish creatures, unlike anything else on Earth with supernatural navigational powers, all originating from the Bermuda Triangle. I mean, at this point, I think you'd be crazy not to start wondering what is up with that area triangle of death. Like, something's going on here. Tier 4. Giant oarfish are, my god, huge fish. They are the longest bony fish in the world, and we have found them reaching up to 8 meters or 26 feet in length. Although there are rumors of them reaching 11 meters or 36 feet in length, which is just clearly absurd. No fish should be that long. But due to its length and size, it is thought that this fish might have been the inspiration for myths and legends like the sea serpent. You know, you're on a boat, you look down and you see this huge long thing just slithering along. I mean, I don't know if they swim like that. It might be, I don't know how they swim, but I can definitely see it as being an inspiration. They're also known sometimes as earthquake fish, as they are rarely seen on the surface and typically live around 3,500 feet deep, which, why am I not surprised that this is a deep sea monster or fish? It's still a bloody monster. Like, why can we never find cuddly sea bunnies or something? It's always demon creatures like this. The HMS Daedalus Sea Serpent. So the HMS Daedalus was a British warship from the 1800s, and in 1848, while en route from the Cape of Good Hope, the captain and his entire crew saw a huge sea serpent that was approximately 60 feet in length, and the account from the captain read, "The creature passed rapidly, but so close under our lee quarter that if it had been a man of my acquaintance, I should have easily recognized his features with the naked eye," which is such an 1800s way of speaking. So could they have possibly seen our previous entry, the giant oarfish? It's possible, I guess, but this was around twice the length of a giant oarfish. It could have been a sei whale that they saw that night, which is the third largest whale in the world outside of blue whales and fin whales. They can actually grow up to 64 feet in length, which would match the size that the men said that the creature was, and it can reach speeds of up to 31 miles per hour, which is, again, similar to what these men described. So, was it a giant mythical sea snake creature? Was it a whale? Was it something else entirely? A hoax? A alien sighting? A demon? I mean, we'll likely never know, because it was 200 years ago, and there's no evidence of it outside of, you know, the men's word, but it is a cool one to think about. The blue whale mating ritual. So this is a reference to the honestly very unique and quite adorable ritual that blue whales have when mating. When getting ready to mate, they nearly always gather near the equator. Then they perform their mating ritual. And this consists of rubbing up against each other, rolling around each other, and then spiraling deep into the ocean, doing censored whale stuff, I guess. Then all of a sudden they rise up from the bottom of the ocean all the way up to the surface, and then when they do come upwards, the male whale inserts his, well, I'm not going to go into that, but this is how the mating is done. So a little strange, a little beautiful in a way, a little poetic and dancey, and it's one of the more cool examples we have of the ocean that is not just, absolutely horrifying and terrifying. The purple orb was this orb of the purple variety that was found 5,000 feet below the surface off the coast of California in 2016. So this whole video is super fun and interesting. The crew involved in this actually broadcast their explorations live on their website, so you can just pop in and potentially watch them discover a new species or new finds. Super cool. And as always, I'll drop a link down in the description if you want to go and check it out. But the purple orb refers to this little knobbly, spiky purple ball that was found on one of their live streams, and they had no idea what it was. They got in closer and closer, then went to grab it. Then a fucking crab comes out of nowhere and puts its stupid little crab claws all over it. But thankfully we've got some incredible human suction technology, so the crew eventually just sucked it up and took it into the ship to examine it. And from what they found, it seems to be a new species of sea slug, which is this mollusk sort of organism never before seen. Now this doesn't seem too surprising, as sea slugs, despite their horrible name, are actually a super varied and beautiful set of creatures. Like, can you imagine the slugs we have in our garden being as bright and colorful and varied as these sea slugs? It would honestly be fantastic. I mean, they would still be slugs, so it wouldn't be that great, but it might help bring a bit of color to the world. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. So this was an image taken in 2011 of the ocean floor using sonar, and so as you can see, it does kind of look a little strange. Some would even say anomalous. There were theories about this being a sunken UFO, or being evidence of some lost ancient civilization, something like Atlantis, or just a whole range of theories and ideas and speculations. There were also a bunch of accusations against the company that took the photo, saying that they were using cheap or ineffective sonar equipment, and so the images couldn't be relied upon or trusted, and then developed plans to actually take super rich people down to see this anomaly for a massive fee, of course. So maybe they had that intention from the start. Maybe they just kind of saw how big and popular it was getting and then tried to, coattail on that. But either way, this image is still rather strange. Brine Pools. So we explored Brine Pools a little earlier on in the iceberg with the Lake of Despair, which is just a especially large brine pool. But brine pools can be really any size, and a lot of them are smaller. And as we explored earlier, these are these little pools of super heavy, quite warm water that stays at the bottom of the ocean and doesn't really mix with any of the water surrounding it. Hence it forming kind of its own little pool even within the ocean. This brine is actually so dense that submersibles can actually land on top of it, and so to get down into the brine, they actually have to actively thrust with quite some force. And of course there are a bunch of deadly and toxic gases either in the pools or surrounding them, which, as we discussed earlier, sometimes leads to some unsuspecting critters walking by it or walking into it, dying from the gases, and then being preserved in the pools for all eternity. So pretty cool and somewhat beautiful, but also extremely terrifying and deadly. Classic ocean. The Devil's Sea. The Devil's Sea, also called the Devil's Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle, and or the Pacific Bermuda Triangle, which shouldn't be confused with the actual Bermuda Triangle, but this is a part of the ocean south of Tokyo, Japan, where, just like its Atlantic counterpart, has been the site of countless missing ships, boats, and airplanes. Now, there are some very strange disappearances that happened within this triangle, more than I can cover in just a single entry. But one notable disappearance that happened in 1945, which I thought was super interesting, was of a Mitsubishi A6M0 airplane. It went missing and was never found, but the final distress call from the pilot said something is happening in the sky. The sky is opening up, and then nothing. Which, I mean, that's not typically what skies tend to do. They tend to be pretty, closed and sky-like, but in the 1950s especially, dozens of ships and planes and submarines all went missing while crossing this triangle, and countless times when rescue crews were sent out to look for them or to save them, they ended up going missing as well. And as with the Bermuda Triangle, there are countless theories about what this might be, from underwater volcanic eruptions to underwater giant gas explosions that are basically released from the bottom of the ocean and then rise up and up and up. And if there's a ship or boat overhead, this gas bubble or explosion can, in theory, catch it as it is rising and just either blow up the boat or capsize it or destroy it or whatever. And then there's all the other theories that were included in the Bermuda Triangle, so interdimensional portals, aliens, lost underwater civilizations, or just natural causes. It's a pretty cool one, and I didn't know that there was essentially a Japanese Bermuda Triangle, but it seems to be equally as strange and unexplainable as its Atlantic cousin. The Mariana Trench is the deepest oceanic trench that we know of, and I emphasize that we know of because there might potentially be deeper trenches out there in the ocean, but we just haven't yet discovered them. Everyone's probably heard about this trench by now, but it sits around this area near the Mariana Islands. It goes down, as far as we can tell, around 11,000 meters or around 36,000 feet, meaning you could fit the entirety of Mount Everest within the trench and still have around 2,000 meters or 7,000 feet left over. So this is one deep trench. They originally, in like the 1800s, measured it with a weighted rope. So they would drop the rope above the trench and then just unreel more and more and more rope, letting it sink down and down and down and down. And then once it hit the bottom, they would measure how much rope they had used, and that was basically how they measured the depth. And using this method, they measured it to be around 8,000 meters, which honestly isn't too far off. They did some more measurements over the next, 100 years or so, and then they moved on to echo sounding, which is where they would shoot sonar essentially down to the bottom and see how long it took to come back up, which is basically what we use today to measure stuff like this. And there have actually been a fair few descents down to the bottom of this trench, with both man and unmanned vehicles. So people, like humans, have actually gone down to the bottom of this, which is just insane. And the pressure way down here is around 1,000 times what it is at sea level. So just like, it is very unexplored, very cold, very dark, and very not a place that I would ever want to visit. Underground ocean. Underground ocean is the theory that our oceans, our seas, all of the water on Earth, didn't come from, say, icy comets hitting the Earth over the years, as is the current belief, but rather that it was inside the Earth when it actually formed. The idea is that the water was below the Earth's mantle, roughly like 400 miles below the Earth's surface, and over the years, it essentially just slowly sweated out of the Earth, like through rocks and earth and volcanoes and stuff. And this slow sweating over millions of years resulted in stuff like our oceans. The theory also says that there is still vast amounts of waters beneath the Earth's mantle, hence underground oceans. This theory mostly comes from the presence of minerals like wodsleyite and ringwoodite, which, while being hard to pronounce, also can and do hold a lot of water in them, leaving some scientists to believe that there is a vast amount more way down under the Earth's crust, and that what we think of as a continual life cycle of water, the water from the oceans evaporates up into clouds, which then eventually condenses and falls down as rain, the life cycle everyone's seen in their primary school science books, that maybe that life cycle is incomplete. In this theory, the life cycle would include the water underneath the mantle. That water would come up through volcanoes, it would sweat out of the rocks, and then go into the oceans, and then get taken up into the clouds, and then fall down, but it would also slowly then get absorbed back into the Earth. We're talking about really slowly here. But it is a pretty cool theory, and once again just shines a light on just how surface level, if you'll excuse the pun, a lot of our knowledge of the Earth actually is. The 1968 Submarine Disappearances. So in 1968, 4 submarines, like whole-ass submarines, went missing, one after the other across 4 entirely different countries. And nobody really knows why. So picture the scene. It's 1968 and worldwide tensions are super high. America was dealing with the totally legitimate and not suspicious at all killings of Bobby Kennedy and MLK, and internationally the Vietnam War was in full swing. The US was at odds with China and Russia, and submarines in particular were getting more and more advanced. A bunch of them had missiles and torpedoes on, they had scanning and tracking capabilities, and a few of them even had nuclear material on board. So that's the backstory. Now, of these 4 submarines, the first one that went missing was the INS Dakar, and this was bought from England by Israel, and everything was kind of going well. It headed all the way down from England, past Spain, and past Crete, all the while sending out pings and information about where it was, how it was doing, and it then planned to head down to Haifa, where it was to be delivered. But suddenly, out of the blue, all communications just stopped. Just 160 kilometers west of Cyprus. Nobody could find out where the submarine was, how it was doing, if it needed rescue, nothing. The US, the UK, Israel, and a bunch of other surrounding countries all worked incredibly hard to search for the vessel and its 69 crew members on board. But after days of finding nothing, they eventually just gave up. And that was basically it for the search for the next 30 years. Then in 1999, extensive searches did actually find the submarine 3,000 kilometers down on the sea floor between Crete and Cyprus. But to this day, nobody really knows what caused the submarine to sink. Then there's the Minerve, which occurred only 2 days after the INS Dakar, and the Minerve was a French submarine, which was due to board at Toulon in the south of France. But it also completely disappeared, along with its 45 crew members, right before it was set to surface and land. Again, searches were done, but turned up nothing, until 50 years later this time. In 2019, the sub was found wrecked 50 kilometers south of Toulon, and again, nobody knows what happened to it or what caused its initial sinking. Then there is the Soviet-owned K-129, which was on patrol in the Pacific Ocean, and once again, just failed to check in. It went completely radio silent, communications went dead, and this sub was actually a nuclear-armed sub. So when it went missing, the Soviets, the Americans, and a few other neighboring countries just went into like a bit of a panic to try and find this sub. And the Soviets were eventually the first ones to give up their search, with the US persisting over time with the search, and eventually finding the sub at the bottom of the ocean, sort of near Hawaii. And again, I sound like a broken record here. Nobody knows really what happened to the sub or what caused it to, explode or to sink. And finally, we have the USS Scorpion, which was in the Atlantic surveilling apparent Soviet activity. And actually just before it went silent, the sub said that it was closing on a Soviet vessel and that it was going to observe it, and then silence. The wreckage was later found nearby on the seafloor, and because it was also carrying nuclear arms, the entire area down there is just super radioactive. I mean, not that anyone would actually go down there, but still. So as you can imagine, the theories covering this one are just all over the place. Some people say that these were just a string of strange coincidences, unhappy accidents, if you will. Others say that they may have been down to undercover underwater warfare, like with the US and Soviet submarines, but that doesn't really explain the other 2 subs. Another theory was that all 4 subs were taken out by some third party with some super advanced technologies or weapons, like say China or Japan, for example, or that they were taken out by aliens or by somewhere like Atlantis, who are still alive and still have super advanced technology and are somewhat annoyed at us, roaming around the ocean and annoying things. So they decided to just blow a few of our submarines up to teach us a lesson, I guess. A lot of theories on this one, but not really too much to go off. But still a strange and mysterious case nonetheless. Coconut crabs. So coconut crabs are equally fascinating and terrifying, I would say. They are the largest terrestrial arthropod, so the largest one on land that we know of, and can weigh up to around 4 kilos. They can grow as wide as 1 meter across, and are, as well as coconut crabs, also called robber crabs. And they are called this because they eat apparently any piece of food that is dropped like anywhere. They can and do eat fruits and nuts and seeds and even meat. So, you know, whatever's lying around, they come by, grab it, pick it up, eat it. So they rob the place. Robber crabs. And aside from their size, another super interesting thing about them is how they breathe. They use something that's kind of between gills and lungs, in that they can't breathe underwater, so they actually drown if they can't get out. But these lungs need water really to function properly, and are kind of like gills, but just optimized to extract the oxygen out of the air instead of out of the water. So all around a pretty cool little critter, or huge critter, I guess. But if I ever meet one on the beach, I will not be a happy man. Blue whale sound. So this entry, from what I can tell, refers to one of two phenomena. The first one being that blue whales every year seem to be singing in a lower and lower tone, and no one knows exactly why. You can see from this graph that all readings of all blue whales from all parts of the world are singing in a lower and lower tone every year. Very strange, and for the most part, unexplained. Then there's this whale sound. That has been heard in many locations since the 1980s, and it is likely thought to be a whale that is singing at exactly 52 hertz. Now this is unusual and strange, because no other whale sings at this frequency, and when they track where this singing is coming from, they can roughly track their migration patterns, and the migration patterns of this particular whale most closely match a blue whale or a fin whale. But blue whales sing between 10 and 39 hertz, and fin whales sing at 20 hertz, so neither of them at 52 hertz. And this apparent whale has never actually been physically observed, so we're not able to confirm what it is or what species it is, or if it's even a species we've yet discovered. It has been called the loneliest whale in the world because it is the only whale around that sings at this frequency, and it is heard every single year traveling around the Pacific Ocean. One theory was that this whale was like a branch off or mutant hybrid or something of a blue whale, which is a super interesting thought, like maybe all of its relatives and species died out. Or people have also suggested that it might be a deaf blue whale, which is singing like normal, but since it can't hear itself, it thinks that it is singing the same as all of the other blue whales, which is a possibility, I guess. But I think until we actually spot this whale and observe it in person, or like visually, we might not ever know for sure what this whale actually is. Tier 5, the 400-year-old shark. So this was a shark that was discovered in Greenland in 2016, and this shark was estimated to be between 400 and 500 years old. This particular species of shark has the longest lifespan of any known vertebrate, and they typically live between 250 and 500 years old, which is insane. So this one they found was born likely sometime in the 1500s, so before the United States was a country, before the knitting machine or bottled beer was invented, before the pocket watch, and when Middle Europe looked like this. Like, what the hell is even this? What are these little countries? But this shark lives way deep down in the North Atlantic and Arctic waters, and because it lives so far down, it has developed this high concentration of this specific chemical in its blood to help with buoyancy. And this chemical in such high doses is completely toxic to humans. But of course, that doesn't stop us from killing and eating these sharks. We just treat the flesh to clear out the toxins, and there you go, it's a delicacy. And don't say it's for some shark revenge or something, as there have been no known attacks from this shark against humans ever. And bear in mind that the world's oldest tortoise found was around 190 years old. So yeah, these sharks beat them by like more than a factor of 2, which is just insane. The Yonaguni Monument. So this is a super cool underwater ruin that is just off the coast of the Yonaguni Island in Japan. It was discovered in the 1980s, and since then, everyone and their mothers has been trying to find out when it was made, how it was made, who made it, and why. If in fact anyone did make it, or if it was just a natural structure. As you can see, it almost looks like steps or layers or floors, and it has these nice flat surfaces with these like nice, really cut clean angles, which is not something you'd typically expect out of nature. But theories for this one are one that it either obviously came from nature, from tectonic shifting causing these rocks to be like pushed up, and so creating this, nice little right angle sort of thing, or of them being from an ancient long lost civilization. Perhaps these were like the streets or the buildings or steps or something like that. Two, of course, supernatural or alien origins, or perhaps an old living quarters of ancient aliens, or perhaps a current living quarters of aliens living down here under the sea, under the rock, under even the sea floor, observing humans with super advanced technology, which is a theory that I apply to a lot of things, probably more than I should, but it is a super mysterious monument nonetheless, and also a super cool and beautiful monument, which is definitely going on my bucket list to explore sometime. The Immortal Jellyfish is a type of jellyfish that is able to revert back essentially to a baby or child, all completely on its own. So after it reaches maturity, if it then becomes old or sick, or even just extremely stressed or injured in some way, it can kind of split out and form a baby jellyfish. And then that jellyfish just grows up again with completely new healthy cells. It can repeat this process seemingly infinitely, meaning it can never really die from natural causes. So it has been dubbed the Immortal Jellyfish. But like a vampire, it still can technically die, as it's only able to do this after it reaches maturity, and if it suffers a massive injury, like say getting eaten by a shark or something, it's obviously not making it out of that one. They are believed to have originated in the Pacific Ocean, but now can actually be found pretty much worldwide, as they are seemingly quite aggressive and they're immortal, which has led to, their population kind of spreading out and flourishing. And even though they are really quite small and hard to track, a doctor from the Smithsonian described this as a giant worldwide silent invasion, which is somewhat terrifying, yet somewhat adorable, as they are just jellyfish at the end of the day, and jellyfish are pretty rad. I should have added this down at the bottom of my apocalypse iceberg, worldwide invasion and death by immortal jellyfish. Bigfin squids are these creepy looking creatures. They are super rare and give off kind of jellyfish vibes with their little legs or arms or tentacles or whatever you want to call them. And as you can see, the squid body isn't really that long, but their arms are like 30 foot in length, which is just insane. This is also the deepest known squid species, found at depths of up to 6,000 meters or 20,000 feet. So once again, they are in the club of these super weird, somewhat terrifying creatures that live deep, deep down in the unexplored oceans. Oh, and they're called bigfin squids because they have big fins. And I mean, yeah, the fins are pretty big. Moving on, Point Nemo is this point. It lies at 4852.6 south, 123.23.6 west, and it is 2,688 kilometers from the nearest landmass. It is out in the South Pacific Ocean, and this is the furthest that any single point is away from land on Earth. Like if you were anywhere else in any other ocean in any part of the world, you would be closer to some land than this point. And actually, when the space station is coming overhead, someone at this point would be closer to the people on the space station than they would be to any human on land, which is just an insane thing to think about. It was first conceived or identified in 1992 by Hrvoje Lukatela. He is a Croatian engineer, and the name Point Nemo is actually a reference to the 1870 book 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas, in which a guy called Captain Nemo basically travels the world in his submarine. And Lukatela was a huge fan of this story growing up, and so he named this particular point after that character. Pretty cool. The world's oldest mammal. So we covered the world's oldest shark earlier, the Greenland shark, but sharks are technically, well, not technically, they are fish and not mammals. So the world's oldest mammal isn't this shark, nor is it the other oldest living living thing, quahogs, which is a type of clam that can live to be like 400 to 500 years old. The world's oldest mammal is thought to be this, the bowhead whale. It is 13 feet or 4 meters long, has strangely the largest mouth of any animal, with its mouth being like a third the length of its body, and it has a large chunk of a head that it uses to smash through ice, hence the name bowhead. Now, these whales have been known about for a while and were often hunted way back in the day. They actually found one of these whales off the Alaskan coast in 2007, and it had a lance or spear basically still in it. And this spear was made between 1879 and 1885, which is absolutely insane, and they thought this whale to be between 115 and 130 years old when it died, meaning it might have had this spear embedded in it for well over 100 years. They're thought to average around 150 to 170 years old and cap out at around like 250 sort of thing. They live pretty much exclusively in the Arctic, and they're also called Greenland right whales. So you've got these Greenland whales, you've got Greenland sharks, and both are the longest living animals in their respective categories. So coincidence? I don't think so. Maybe it's something about these waters up near Greenland, keeps them nice and cold and preserved. Maybe. Or, you know, maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about, as I'm not a marine biologist, which, I mean, is always a possibility. The biblical Leviathan is one of the giant creatures or monsters found in the biblical accounts. So this story changes, understandably, depending on what account you read. Christian scholars and sources and books all describe the story and the monster slightly differently, but the general idea is that the Leviathan was this giant sea creature that God created and was kind of an embodiment of chaos sort of thing. And he also made the Behemoth, which was like a similar creature but just on land instead of in the sea. God then slew the Leviathan a little bit later on in order to provide the Hebrews with food in the wilderness, which surely even like grilled camel is better. Like, you're really gonna eat Leviathan meat? Like, really? But this story and creature originally came from early Judaism, and likely originally came from an earlier story, the Canaanite story of Lotan. And this was a giant serpentine sea creature that was a servant of the sea god Yamu, and it was eventually killed by Hadad, who was the storm and rain god. So, pretty cool stuff. Then there's the Babylonian story of the god Marduk, who defeated Tiamat, who is serpentine. So the idea of gods defeating or killing serpentine creatures or creations isn't necessarily new or unique, but these Babylonian and Canaanite stories were in multi-god religions. So within them, you could have one god creating this serpentine creature and another god destroying or slaying it. But obviously with the Abrahamic religions being a one god sort of deal, you get this idea of God both creating and defeating the serpentine creature of chaos, which in this case was the Leviathan. So a pretty cool creature, a pretty cool backstory, but I just don't know about eating barbecued Leviathan. I mean, maybe if you dipped it in butter and put a little salsa on it, but that's still a big maybe. Vertical migration is this pretty interesting phenomenon. I mean, I guess you can call it that. It's more like a behavior of certain animals in that they migrate to the shallow surface level of the water or down to the cold, dark depths, depending on the time of day. So you've got these zooplankton, and they eat these other tiny beings called phytoplankton. And phytoplankton basically all live on the surface level. But zooplankton themselves are hunted by fish and whales and birds, which use the shallow waters and the abundance of sunlight to, you know, spot them out and then attack and eat them. So what does the zooplankton do? If it lives up near the surface, it gets eaten. If it lives lower down, it doesn't have any food down there, so it starves to death. Well, this is where this mass vertical migration comes in. The zooplankton hide way down in the dark depths during the daytime when it's most dangerous for them up above. Then when the nighttime comes, they travel up to the surface as much as 1,000 meters in order to feed, eat, and hunt. And because it's now nighttime, there is a lot less light in the surface level waters, and so it is a lot harder for their predators to find and eat them, which, you know, it's not an insane concept. There are obviously loads of animals that hide at night and then go hunting in the day, or vice versa, but I'd personally never heard of this one before. And the fact that they migrate kind of up and down makes for, I think, a pretty cool little behavior. Heraklion. So this one was just insanely fascinating, and it absolutely blew my mind reading about it. Heraklion was the Greek name for this port city, which was located in northern Egypt, northeast of Alexandria. The Egyptian name for it was Tonis or Toni, and it was only actually in recent years that historians thought of them as being the same city, because we didn't know exactly where they were located, and there was no ruins ever found of them. And because they had two different names, historians thought they were two distinct places. We first find reference to them at around the 12th century BC, so like 3,200 years ago, and there are many old accounts and references to both Tonis and Heraklion, with Greek historians such as Strabo, Diodorus, and Herodotus, and they often mention the cities along with legends of Greek figures and heroes. So modern historians were kind of perplexed at the whole thing. You know, were these cities just part of a myth or legend, like maybe what a lot of people thought Atlantis was? Or were they just creatively written with inspiration from other existing port cities? Or did they actually exist? Well, most historians before the year 2000 believed that Tonis and Heraklion were indeed separate cities. They believed that they were two port cities located along the coast of northern Egypt, and that just over the years they became destroyed and abandoned, and the more popular port city of Alexandria just basically took all of the business, and these cities just disappeared into, you know, nothingness. And this belief that was held for so long changed massively, as I said, in the year 2000, when the remains essentially of this city was actually found. As I said, these weren't actually cities. They were city, in that it was just one single city with two different names. And this was confirmed when this plaque or stele was found in the ruins, that basically kind of references Tonis and Heraklion interchangeably, making historians basically realize that, oh, they're the same city. So huge revelation already. And another super interesting thing about the find was the location of it. As I said, Heraklion was originally thought to have been located on the coast of mainland Egypt as a port city, which explains why archaeologists weren't looking further out into the sea, because in the year 2000, buried under tons of sand and debris, completely undetectable to the naked eye, French archaeologist Franck Godiot used various technologies to uncover the preserved sunken city of Heraklion. It was not located off the mainland coast, but rather it was its own island. The island was located off the coast, but this maybe helps explain why it was never really found before this. People were just generally looking in the wrong place, I guess. In the city, they found temples, they found buildings and roads, old coins, depictions, 70 sunken ships, and a wide array of personal belongings. And they estimate that only 5% of the city has actually been excavated. So there is still a ton left to potentially discover, because partly since it was hidden so well, pretty much no plundering or looting or ransacking or anything like that had taken place since the city originally sank. They also found an ancient warship sunken down and held down by collapsed buildings, and this was a Greek warship that had these Egyptian markings and designs on. So just this find alone gave historians a massive insight into the huge collaboration at the time between the Greeks and the Egyptians, especially when it came to stuff like building ships. And actually, one of the reasons that the city actually had two names is because this city, obviously in Egypt, had quite a large Greek population, and so collaborations like this were kind of to be expected. So it is thought that the city collapsed essentially into the ocean due to either earthquakes, tidal waves, storms, and perhaps after a particularly large and catastrophic one, everything started to go down and people just fled immediately. And this was actually one of the main port cities at the time, and so people obviously just migrated away from Heraklion, and Alexandria then later became the main port city. It's a very cool, at least to me, story of a place and a city that was kind of known to exist. We knew the general area of it, but we couldn't quite pinpoint it on the map, and it just lay under the sea and under the rubble and sand for like 1200 years, where realistically no one would accidentally discover it, and this obviously preserved the city for us to now explore. And there is a ton more stuff to find within the city, so I am super excited for the new discoveries that they might make. Tier 6, the 2003 Great White Incident. So great whites are obviously scary to say the least, and they are some of the top predators in the ocean. They're like the spiders of the ocean. Black eyes, killer attitude, terrifying, but no webs, thank God. Like, can you imagine underwater webs with silk coming out like the back of sharks as they just weave random webs in the ocean and then just being caught up in one if you're on a boat or a submarine or something? Like, I think I've just invented a new fear. Sea spiders. Fucking no thank you. Well, in 2003, a research team fitted a tracking device on a great white shark, and this was a 9-foot female great white. And the whole idea was to, you know, track its habits, where it went, and to get a greater insight into sharks as a whole. But what they found a few months later was this tracking device washed up on the shore with no shark attached to it. They found no remains, no bones, no flesh, nothing, just the device. And so they naturally took the device, looked at the data on it, and what they found on it confused and somewhat terrified them. They found that the shark was basically swimming in one direction and then all of a sudden darted the other way, dove 2,000 feet deeper into the ocean, and the temperature that the device was recording went from 7 degrees to almost 25 degrees. And this whole chain of events suggested to the researchers that the shark had actually been eaten by assumedly another predator, as the rise in temperature suggested that the tracking device was now inside of another creature, and the dive down possibly suggested that whatever attacked and ate this shark originated from the depths of the ocean, came up, saw this shark, fed on it, and then plunged back down to where it was more comfortable. It was also a potential theory that this 9-foot shark dove down so deep on purpose to try and avoid whatever was chasing or attacking it. There were theories of this predator being a giant mutated great white shark that just swallowed whole this entire smaller great white, or that it was a terrifying ocean monster, or that it was something maybe like a giant squid or a giant killer whale, or that it was a weaponized megalodon created and controlled by the Russians, which is honestly my favorite theory. But researchers leant towards it being a larger great white shark that they thought might have had a mutation like giantism, and that was possibly twice the length of this great white and weighed over 2 tons. And it's not super unusual for sharks to cannibalize their own kind, so this is a possibility. Just a wild one either way, but kind of terrifying no matter which way you look at it, because no matter what you believe, this was a great white and it was eaten almost whole, if not very quickly. So whatever killed it, whatever it was, must have been even more terrifying. Globster. So the term globster basically refers to any body or mass that washes up on shore or is found in the ocean that we just can't identify. There are tons of these found all over the world, referred to as either globsters or monsters or creatures, and while some of them are solved and are maybe eventually identified, a surprising amount of them never are. We will cover a few of them in these upcoming entries, but globster is just the general term for them. German U-boat 60-foot crocodile. So this was a creature spotted one time ever and was described as being this huge reptilian creature resembling something like a crocodile, hence the name of the entry. This was in World War I, and the creature was spotted by the crew members of this German submarine in the North Atlantic. They were tracking this British steamboat. They fired their missiles at it, and within seconds the boat was submerged, it sank down, and then less than a minute later the ship exploded. And when it exploded, tons of little bits of the ship and water and all sorts shot up into the air roughly 80 feet, and along with all of this debris, the crew members agreed was this giant crocodile. It was 60 feet in length, had 4 distinct legs, it had a long tail, a long neck, and it had webbed feet. And then after being blown into the air, air, it fell back down into the water, and then just disappeared before the German boat could capture it or track it or anything like that. The account in the captain's logbook read, "At that moment, I had with me in the conning tower 6 of my officers on the watch, including the chief engineer, the navigator, and the helmsman. Simultaneously, we all drew one another's attention to this wonder of the seas, which was writhing and struggling among the debris. We were unable to identify the creature, but all of us agreed that it resembled an aquatic crocodile, which was about 60 feet long, with 4 limbs resembling large webbed feet, a long pointed tail, and a head which also tapered to a point. Unfortunately, we were not able to take a photograph, for the animal sank out of sight after 10 or 15 seconds. And it is not really thought that the captain made this account up, as apparently claims like this were kind of ridiculed at the time, and they weren't really believed, so he would really have nothing to gain from this, and in a sense, everything to lose. So what could this creature that they saw have been? Well, there are theories that say that this creature was just unlucky and swimming by the encounter. You know, it just happened to swim over the British ship when it went down, and then when it exploded, it knocked this creature up into the air. But generally, the noise and chaos of these Navy attacks and fights are enough to drive creatures away from them. So it's a little unreasonable to think that this creature would swim directly through one of these engagements. So then someone thought, what if the creature was there all along? Maybe the British ship was actually transporting this creature, and when the ship was shot and sank down and then blew up, the creature went up into the air along with all the debris, which is also a very interesting theory of, you know, the British researching and transporting this extinct creature. It's very sci-fi or James Bond-esque. It is also thought that this might have been a mosasaur, which was this giant sea lizard creature thought to have gone extinct roughly 66 million years ago. But maybe it didn't. Or some version of a Sarcosuchus, which was the largest crocodile ever to live. But again, this died out a long time ago, roughly 112 million years ago. Or so we thought. Or it could be any of the many once thought extinct creatures from the last 100 million years. Like, there's a lot of creatures on that list. But it's a pretty cool account, a pretty cool cryptid, and definitely a wild and interesting one to think about if you ascribe to the idea that the British were transporting this creature, which is a super fun one to explore. Sargasso Sea's carnivorous seaweed. So the Sargasso Sea is somewhere that we have discussed earlier in this iceberg, and this is the place where all eels from Europe and America are born. This whole area. But this sea is also known for something else, and that is the huge amounts of this very dense brown seaweed, and this stuff is just everywhere. Now, there are rumors that go back as far as like the 1800s that this seaweed was actually carnivorous. I think it came from a general fear of the sea, as for one, the winds around the sea were quite calm. Now, you might think crazy winds might be more scary, and insane winds and waves and weather and stuff does have its fair share of danger. But if you think about it, if the winds are super calm, then especially in those days when a lot of the movement of ships was reliant on wind, once you kind of got stuck in a place within this sea, it was a little hard to get out of, as there was typically no wind in order to free your ship. And secondly, there was all of this thick seaweed, which, as I said earlier, was just everywhere. It was quite hard to see, and oftentimes the ships would get caught in this. So imagine if you're back in the 1800s, you're just cruising around this sea, your ship gets caught in all of the seaweed, and there's no winds whatsoever in order to free you or get you out. This could very quickly lead to your entire ship and your entire crew starving to death, running out of supplies, lots of problems. So it's no wonder that there was a lot of fear and rumors and legends around this sea. And some of the lore was about this carnivorous seaweed, you know, appearing out of nowhere, trapping ships and boats, knocking sailors off into the water, and then eating them, leaving absolutely no trace. It's a pretty cool, pretty scary concept. There's of course, as you might have guessed, no actual evidence for this. I mean, none that we've ever witnessed, at least. As you know, we have actually gathered up some of this seaweed and done tests on it and found no gaping teeth or hole of any kind. So it seems like, for now, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And, you know, all the other terrifying, deep, dark things in the ocean. Like ocean spiders. But just not seaweed, for Christ's sake. The Montauk Monster. So this was this creature that was found washed up on the beach in Montauk, New York in 2008. The creature's body was found, people thought it was a bit weird or very weird, and photos of it started to spread on the internet and through media outlets and social media and even in the local paper. Everyone thought that it looked weird as all heck. It was like short-haired or shaved or even hairless. It had what looked like a beak on the front of its face, but it was a mammal, not a bird, and it seemed to have some sort of tag on its right arm or paw. Very strange and very unexplained. People were speculating that it might be some sort of weird turtle without a shell, or some kind of mutant experiment conducted by the government, you know, like splicing different species together or something. They thought that it might be an alien species, it might be an alien experiment, or some long forgotten dog, rodent, turtle hybrid creature that we, you know, hadn't yet discovered. Tons of possibilities. But one of the more substantial ones was some experts suggesting that it was maybe a raccoon. They said that this raccoon had obviously been in the water for a long time, so a bunch of its fur had decayed, the front of its head had decayed, leaving, you know, like just the bone part, which kind of made it look like a beak. And the body is no longer available for examination, so we can't exactly definitively tell what it was. But let me know what you think about this one down in the comments below. It does look very odd though. The Stronsay Beast. So this was this large globster. And hey, there's that word we learnt earlier. This was a beast that washed up on the shore of the island of Stronsay in Scotland. This was in 1808 after a very large storm, and the body of this creature was like 55 feet long, but it couldn't be identified as any species that we knew at the time. It was long-necked, long-tailed, just quite long in general, and so the people who found it at the time categorized it as some sort of mythical giant sea snake or something. It was a very strange creature all round. It had like 6 legs, a long eel-like neck, the head of a sheep apparently, huge eyes, and grey skin that was rough one way and smooth the other way. It also had a mane apparently of this long wiry hair that also glue in the dark. Wait, glue isn't a word? Like, not like sticking glue, but like past tense of glow. Alright, whatever. Glowed in the dark. I still think glue works. But this was a pretty strange creature, and after around a week or two, the rumors and news of this sighting seemed to spread far and wide. But one of the problems was the creature had already rotted away and washed away into the sea, so there was no actual evidence for it except for a tiny bit of the corpse and the testimony of these 4 men. All the men that originally saw the beast swore before a magistrate that that is what they saw and that their account was full and factual, and that was basically the end of it. A strange event of a sighting of a strange creature and the 4 men who swore before a magistrate that they were telling the truth. Later, some biologists suggested that it may have been something like a basking shark that was very decomposed and so was possibly hard to identify at the time, which is a reasonable suggestion, I guess, except for the fact that the largest basking shark ever found was around 40 feet, which is a whole 15 feet shorter than the Stronsay Beast. So, who really knows? Schaefer's anglerfish. So this is a strange little fish, honestly. This here is the little guy, or rather little gal, as the male ones are just really super tiny, but she lives way down deep in the ocean, because of course she does. Everything that's weird lives super deep down for some reason, but she lives all the way down on the bottom of the ocean floor, and she, as a lot of anglerfish tend to do, just sits there really still, motionless, and waits for prey to come by. And when they do, she jingles that little thing on top of her head, which some animals mistake for food or prey or something, and when they come by to investigate, she launches and gobbles them up. Gobble, 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 gobble. And what's quite unique about this anglerfish is its fins. I mean, look at them. They're basically like these little legs. And with these little fake legs, it can basically walk along the bottom of the ocean floor. So it basically just creeps around there instead of swimming, which is, I guess, pretty convenient. And its body is also covered in these like little spikes, which make it look something like a punk of sorts. It's a very unique, pretty cool fish, but also extremely terrifying if you are one of the things that it eats all the way down there. Like, imagine it is pitch black down there and you're just swimming around, minding your own business. You see a little piece of food up ahead, you go up to get it, and then chomp, fucking out of nowhere, you are just dead. And this honestly makes me super happy to be a human. The Casper Octopus are these cute little sea ghosts. They were discovered in 2016 just off the coast of Hawaii, and we haven't actually captured or secured any of these so far. We've just observed or spotted these squidgy little sea ghosts on various underwater video or imagery. They were found 2.5 miles below the surface, and they're quite unique, a little bit different from some of the other deep sea octopuses, or is it octopi? But either way, super cool little species. Coconut crabs ate Amelia Earhart. So coconut crabs are these huge eat anything guys that we covered earlier in the iceberg, and Amelia Earhart we covered in the Unsolved Mysteries iceberg. She was basically one of the greatest pilots of all time and was set to be the first woman to complete a flight around the entire world, when all of a sudden she, her co-pilot, and her plane all stopped communications and went missing and were never found. So naturally, theories and ideas and speculations about where she ended up have developed over the years. And one theory was that Earhart crashed on one of the many islands occupied by coconut crabs, which is mainly in a bunch of the small islands in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Like maybe her plane crashed offshore and then she either swam or used her lifeboat to get onto the island. And maybe she lived there for a while but eventually starved to death, and then these coconut crabs ate her carcass. So the plane would be at the bottom of the ocean, no evidence for that. Her body and all of her belongings would have been eaten by the crabs, which explains why she was never found. And it's not too bad of a theory, honestly, but it is pretty terrifying, as I think most theories surrounding these giant coconut crabs would be. And now I have discovered a new fear: being eaten by coconut crabs. Tier 7, the St. Augustine Monster. So this was this giant globster found in St. Augustine, Florida in 1896. It was one of the first ever recorded globsters found, and was kind of, in the literal sense, a actual globster, or you could say a blobster. It was this huge gelatinous blob that was first identified as an octopus, but it was dubbed a giant octopus just because of its sheer size. It was, at the time they found it, quite decomposed, quite mutilated, and so it was kind of hard to tell what it was, or even to rule out what it wasn't. It was this giant blob with these apparent stumps or arms sticking out, which led them to the conclusion that it was probably an octopus. But later examinations of the creature suggested that it might have instead just been a decayed sperm whale, and that the blobbiness of the creature was really just the whale's blubber. So it's not super clear what this creature or animal or monster actually was, but it is definitely a strange one. Phantom Island is a super cool entry and refers to these phantom or ghost islands. I mean, they're not islands filled with ghosts, but rather they're islands that are found on these old maps all around the world. And when we follow these maps and look for the islands, they no longer exist, if in fact they ever did. One cool example is a place called High Brazil, which is not to be confused with this Brazil, but the island of High Brazil was rumored way back in the 1300s to be an island that sat out on the west of Ireland, and this was reflected in many maps at the time. But modern searches for the island obviously can't find it, meaning it doesn't currently exist. Not that it never existed. As with Phantom Islands, one of the theories about these is that they used to exist like Atlantis or Heraklion, but for some reason sank, disappeared, and took everyone down with them. There are hundreds of these islands mapped out over the years on many local and world maps, and one fantastic example I found of a mistaken phantom island was the island of California. Like, literally, people once thought in like the 1600s that California was an island off the west coast of America. It obviously is quite firmly attached to the mainland of America, but this little peninsula part at the bottom probably misled people into thinking like the entirety of California was like that. And at the time, there were rumors of California being this lush, bountiful place, and so they kind of developed the idea of it being this separate, maybe Garden of Eden type of island, and they kind of bounced back and forth with the idea of it being an island or just more like what it actually is. And this is a very interesting topic to dive into. There are potentially hundreds of phantom islands out there. Some may be cartographical mistakes, some may be rumors or legends, but some may be islands of a long lost civilization that only exist now at the bottom of the ocean. Cool stuff. Ningen are these creepy paper white creatures that have apparently been spotted in Antarctica by various people. They are thought and rumored to be a whole range of things, from misidentified Antarctic animals to ice chunks to descendants of Thalassophobia, which, did you know they used to be giant underwater sloths? Because I sure didn't. Like, what? Or they are said to be an old extinct species that, you know, didn't go extinct, like the Aquila lamna malachi, or eagle shark as it's known, from millions of years ago. They're apparently very hard to photograph, often only appear at night, and there's no super solid evidence for them or photographs of them. And since reports and stories of them first started to appear on Japanese internet forums in the 2000s, it is thought by some that they are, and always have been, just a modern myth, invented and propagated by these mischievous Japanese internet users. But I like to think they exist, if not just for the possibility of rediscovering giant underwater sloths. So cool. The untouchable bathysphere fish. So to kind of set the scene for this one, we have to go back to the 1930s. And this is when explorer and marine biologist William Beebe kind of helped design this thing, the bathysphere. And this allowed two people to basically climb inside of it and lower themselves down to insane depths, up to down to like 3,000 feet. Now, this whole story and history is just wild, and I've been reading about it for like an hour, but it basically involves this really cool designer and engineer called Otis Barton. He helped design and perfect and build the bathysphere, and then he and William took multiple trips down in it and broke record after record while doing so. And keep in mind, just for later, that these dives were all in the Bermuda Triangle. Before these two had made and designed and used the bathysphere, the deepest humans could go in a diving helmet, this thing, was like a few hundred feet. The deepest submarines could go at that time was like 400 feet. And the world record for the deepest dive at the time was 525 feet by someone in a fully armored, reinforced diving suit. So when, as I said, they used this bathysphere to dive down to 3,000 feet, that was kind of a big deal at the time. And it was actually the first time that anyone had actually observed this deep sea environment in person. They had a lamp on the bathysphere that they could basically turn on to observe through this 8-inch window. And Beebe saw, described, and classified many species of fishes that up until that point weren't even known about. There were 5 types of fishes that Beebe saw and documented, and these are collectively known as Beebe's abyssal fishes. But this entry is referring to one species in particular, the Bathysphaera intacta, or the untouchable bathysphere fish, which was this huge, long, 6-foot glowing fish, although the rest of them are pretty cool and interesting as well. As I said, these fish had never been seen before, but they have also never been seen since. And this led some people to believe that maybe Beebe had potentially made it up, or he made a mistake. And personally, I don't think either of those are very likely. He spent damn near his entire life studying animals, going on expeditions and explorations. I mean, like, honestly, check out his resume. It is plump. I think more likely what happened is BB dove down into the deep dark depths into the unknown of, again, as we mentioned earlier, the Bermuda Triangle. I think he genuinely witnessed some of these species, and if they were small enough in population and rare enough, it's not unusual at all, I don't think, for us to not have observed them or seen them since. And then you get into the whole idea of the Bermuda Triangle with potentially really strange creatures down there, and also with theories of the Bermuda Triangle having like interdimensional portals for these fish to, you know, go into another dimension, which explains why we have never seen them, or of the Bermuda Triangle having like crevices that go way deeper than even the Mariana Trench, potentially into this other separate underground ocean near like the Earth's mantle, and these were where the fishes originated from. So maybe they've just gone back home, and that explains why we haven't seen them since. A very cool one, and I have now just spent 3 hours researching this one, so yeah, check it out if you want to. Super cool. But moving on, we have the Flannan Isle mystery. So this was a very strange event disappearance that took place on the island of Eilean Mor in the year 1900. Now this island was one of the hundreds of islands scattered around in this area, all off the coast of Scotland, and this island in particular, Eilean Mor, had a lighthouse. It had 3 lighthouse keepers and not much else. Nobody lived here besides the lighthouse keepers, and on this particular day there was a ship headed to the island, and on board this ship was Joseph Moore, a replacement lighthouse keeper. So he was meant to go to the island, swap out with one of the other lighthouse keepers, and, you know, give them a break sort of thing. So the ship rocks up to the island and nobody's there to greet them. A bit strange. So they blast their horn and still nothing. They fire a flare up towards the island, and again, absolutely nothing. So the people on this ship were obviously a little concerned. Joseph Moore headed out from the ship on a little rowboat to the island. He landed on the island to investigate, and what he found was part mystery, part horror film, and part just completely unexplainable and mind-boggling. He landed on the shore, made his long journey up the cliff to the lighthouse, and when he got there, he noticed that the door to the lighthouse was left open, so not a good sign already. He went inside and saw that 2 of the heavy raincoats were missing, and he found inside of the lighthouse part chaos and part order. It looked like there had been a meal made inside of the kitchen, but it was half eaten and a chair was knocked over, almost as if someone was eating a meal at the kitchen table and then got up out of their seat quickly for some reason, knocking the chair backwards onto the floor. The clocks in the lighthouse all had stopped working, and Joseph figured that whatever happened here must have happened around about a week ago. They searched the entire lighthouse and pretty much the entire island, and none of the men were found, nor any evidence of them or what happened to them. So Moore headed back to the ship. They sent off a telegram to the mainland, and they alerted the board director of the lighthouse to what they found. Eventually, the superintendent, who was like the guy in charge on the mainland, sailed out to the island himself, and this superintendent actually personally hired all 3 lighthouse keepers. So he knew them personally quite well. He and a few men went in, looked around, searched the lighthouse, and they found the logs of the lighthouse. And when they found these, the mystery just like stepped up an entire notch. Maybe even 2 notches. A week before whatever happened to the men apparently happened, the second assistant keeper wrote of severe winds, the like of which I have never seen before in 20 years, and noted that the main keeper was very quiet at the time, and the other assistant keeper was crying, which this wasn't just like a boy or a young sailor or something. This other keeper, William MacArthur, was a well-seasoned sailor and marine man that was known for being quite a tough guy, quite manly, quite experienced, and he was incredibly well-versed with water and the ocean. So the idea of him crying over even a strong wind seems a little strange and unusual. The next day in the logs said that the storm was getting worse and that all three of the keepers were praying, which again is a little strange. They weren't even out on the sea. They were sound and secure in a solid stone lighthouse. And again, they were all very experienced men who had simply no need to pray over something like wind. And the final entry in the log read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." And we have no idea what is meant by that last part. Now, there are a ton of very strange, very peculiar things in this series of events. And the first one is that in this particular area, there were no storms reported on the days of the 12th to the 15th, which is when these entries were all written. All reports in the area at that time said that the skies were clear and that the seas were calm. Secondly, the fact that all three men were missing was also very unusual because the rules and regulations of the lighthouse, which the men were all very, very well aware of, say that there must always be at least one lighthouse keeper remaining just in case two of the lighthouse keepers go off and die or something. This ensures there is always at least one person there to man the lighthouse and to stop ships crashing into the island. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there were 2 coats missing, but 3 men missing. So why or even how would anyone go out into this weather? You know, it's Scotland, it's the middle of winter, and apparently there was like the worst storm they had ever experienced happening. Why would someone go out into this without a jacket? And even if the storm had abided, as I said, it was still Scotland and it was still December. Did one of the men just go crazy and leave the lighthouse for some reason, not taking their jackets? And then maybe the other 2 men ran out after them to try and save him. It could potentially be that. But other theories came about when they found some new evidence. And this evidence was found near the landing platform. And that was some rope that had been scattered all over the rocks. And these ropes were actually normally in a crate attached to the supply crane 70 feet above the landing platform. So naturally, one theory, one of the first theories that came about from this actually, was that in this huge storm, the crane above the landing platform must have like come loose and potentially fell down. The men didn't want to lose it, so they went out into this weather, grabbed the rope and tried to maybe pull the crane back into the land, but maybe they were knocked over by some wind or waves. And this one sounds like it might make a bit of sense until you really think about it. 1. Why would one of the keepers go out without a jacket in the first place? Doesn't make any sense. 2. If you say that the storm abided, so the weather was fine enough for someone to go out without a jacket, firstly, why did the other 2 men take their jackets as well? And secondly, how did they get blown or washed away into the ocean if there was no storm present? You can't have completely calm, fine weather and hellish storm at the same time. 3. Why did all 3 men leave at the same time when they very well knew it was against the rules? 4. Why was there no evidence found for these men, as a lot of the things that fall off the island just into the ocean eventually end up washing back on shore? And 5, well, maybe 4.5, as this is kind of a minor one. But it's kind of insane to think that with all the experience that these 3 men had, like they were expert sailors and lighthouse keepers, to think that they would do something so risky and dangerous as this. And then also that all 3 of them would like get washed away with a random wave or something. Like you'd think they'd see far enough ahead and expect a wave and take some safety precautions. Otherwise they would have died on a ship like 20 years ago. You know, these weren't foolish men. And then there's the fact that the Lewis Island, which is another island that is so close to Eileen Moor that you can actually see the lighthouse with the naked eye. This Lewis Island reported a clear sky and calm waters and a consistent view of the lighthouse during those few days that this apparently occurred. So honestly, who knows what happened? Theories on this one range quite massively, from pirates to aliens to government conspiracy to like interdimensional portals to stuff like the mass hysteria of all 3 men. Or perhaps it was just a freak accident. It's now 124 years later, and it is honestly looking less and less likely that we will ever find out the truth. 4chan sea carpet. So this is a reference to the theorized legendary creature that, if you imagine it, is just this huge dark black carpet, almost like a giant manta ray that just roams and floats along the bottom of the ocean. This creature just apparently consumes and eats everything down there, and it is pitch black, so it can't really be seen, but it is an incredibly scary and creepy thought. This originated as an interesting 4chan post, hence it being legendary, and there's not really too much evidence for it, but what there is evidence for, and what this legend might actually be based on, is this microbial mat or carpet that is as big as Greece, apparently, found off the west coast of South America. These microbes are so primitive that they actually eat hydrogen sulfide and they breathe nitrates, as there is no light or oxygen this far down. They are all on the sea floor and are considered possibly to have descended from some of the earliest life forms on our planet, back before there was even oxygen here. So an absolutely wild find, but not quite the sea carpet monster that 4chan had in mind. Unidentified 4-tentacled jellyfish. So this was a very strange jellyfish found in Hawaii that has these 4 odd jointed arms or tentacles sticking out of the top of its body. It is a really strange, peculiar looking creature when you look at it, and to me what makes this creature really strange is that not only do these tentacles have like weird knees sort of thing, like they don't just come straight out, they kind of go at an angle, but these tentacles are also on the top of its body. Like it feels like they should just be copied and pasted down to its bottom or something. A very strange and almost alien-like creature. The Sawyer Antarctic Godzilla. So this wasn't some version of Godzilla for vegetarians. This was a huge, strange, gigantic creature seen by the Japanese research ship, the Sawyer, in 1958 Antarctica. There's not too much evidence for this one outside of the ship's crew witnessing this. It was described as giant with hair on its body and a face like a cow-monkey hybrid, which is just incredibly disturbing, and pointed ears. It is massive, it is scary, it is Godzilla apparently, and I am convinced that creatures like this do exist somewhere deep down in our world's oceans, just biding their time, waiting for their moment to strike, to destroy humanity. I might be a little paranoid. Tier 8, the Cosmic Ocean. So the Cosmic Ocean is this super interesting myth and idea that originates way back and is kind of shared by many cultures, from like the Egyptians to the Greeks to the Jews, even ancient Indians, Persians and Sumerians. And the main idea is that the entire universe is an ocean in some way, and we here on Earth are just like an island. Before our Earth there was this cosmic ocean, even before our sun there was this cosmic ocean, and the sky in this belief is basically just another part of the ocean, like an upper layer of the ocean or something. And it's a pretty cool idea and notion that is honestly not too far off reality. Like they imagined space and the universe as kind of like an ocean, which obviously isn't true, but that's really all that they could do at the time. The idea was that out there, way out, everywhere, is just like pure emptiness, vastness and chaos. And what was the most vast, empty, chaotic thing that people back then could think of? Well, the ocean. So, ocean everywhere. And there are many mythologies all around the world from all of these different cultures that make some idea of God pulling the earth and civilization up from this cosmic ocean and turning it into the world that we all know and love. And I think there's a deeper idea in here about humanity and civilization being the result of what happens when we rise above the chaos of the ocean. I mean, not the literal ocean, but like the embodiment of chaos, which maybe I'm just overthinking this. It is a really cool concept either way that I could honestly spend hours exploring. So if you like this kind of stuff, go check out this mythology. It is pretty cool. The Eltanin antenna. So this was this very strange item or creature that was photographed almost 13,000 feet below sea level in the Antarctic in 1964. Now, obviously, the strangest thing about this, which you might have guessed, are these straight lines, because nature doesn't tend to be straight. It tends to be squiggly. It is human beings that tend to create straight lines within things, and so this is why this photo got so much attention. And we never really found out what it was. Some people say that it is this carnivorous sponge, the Chondrocladia concrescens, which, I mean, as well as being awfully hard to pronounce, it bears some resemblance, I guess, to the antenna, but it's still not quite perfect. So people have, of course, suspected it of being alien in origin, like a piece of lost alien tech or something from eras past, or perhaps a currently working alien tech that is like an antenna plugged into the sea floor, taking in all of this information from the sea and passing it to who knows where. Or it could just be a Wi-Fi booster for the ancient giant oceanic beast population living underneath the ocean, which, I mean, that's where I'd probably place my bets. Ocean at night. Boy, oh boy, did I search far and wide to answers for this entry. And I couldn't really find any specific mystery or phenomenon for this one related to the ocean at night. But what I could come up with was that, one, the ocean is especially scary at night. You know, it's dark, it's scary, it's often cold, and combined with the already terrifying body that is the ocean, this creates terror times 2, or terror squared, depending on how you imagine my made-up maths. And 2, that the ocean is also, or at least can be, incredibly peaceful and blissful. In the daytime, you can typically see other things that aren't the ocean, like clouds, boats, people, animals. You can see a bunch of light everywhere, you can hear noise, but in the nighttime, for the most part, there's none of that. At least not on particularly quiet and dark nights. So you can really focus on the ocean, and this is like a two-pronged fork sort of thing, where, as I said, it can be incredibly therapeutic and calming just listening to the waves, or you can see it as you have nothing to distract you from the terror of the ocean, and so you're stuck just looking out into the vast dark unknown, waiting for it to just swallow you up. And I mean, this probably applies to all times of day with the ocean, but especially at night. The black demon is this giant black shark that is said to live just off the coast of the Californian peninsula. It is said to be between 20 and 60 feet in length and weigh up to 100,000 pounds. It also resembles a great white shark, only much larger and with a darker coloration, hence the name Black Demon. The sightings for this one are quite rare, but not too rare. They are medium rare, one could say, and various people suggest that this could be a megalodon, or this could be a mutant great white shark with maybe gigantism or something. But either way, sharks are terrifying as they are, and so I can see why one that was 100,000 pounds and 60 foot in length was given the name of Demon. The contorted squid was this squid found in the Gulf of Mexico in 2018, and what was unique about this squid was how it kind of folded and contorted itself up to the point where it hardly looked like a squid at all. It just looked like a contorted thing. The people who found it said that it was the most bizarre squid they had ever seen, and apparently it's quite normal for squids to kind of pull their arms in a defensive manner, but never quite this extreme. It does look quite beautiful though, but it is a shame that it is a squid and therefore pure evil. The Sea People Invasion. Boy oh boy, this is a fantastic one. I covered this one in my Unsolved Mysteries iceberg, but it is honestly a topic that I could dive into for hours or days or even maybe weeks. The Sea People were these mysterious people that came from we don't know where, and they attacked ancient Egypt as well as some other cities and areas in the Mediterranean. This was around 1200 to 900 BC, so like 3,000 years ago roughly, and the Sea People were actually thought to be part of a larger confederacy, just like in America how you have each state is its own kind of entity in its own right, but they're all united under the federal government, and these Sea People might have been some early version of this, different different clans and peoples and tribes, all under one banner. They all seemed to be very good fighters and very good sailors, but a lot of them looked somewhat different, and in regards to their clothes, weapons, and decorations, furthering the idea that these were kind of different peoples, all united under one leader or one cause, but basically just all fighting as one. They attacked and raided Anatolia, Syria, Phoenicia, Canaan, Cyprus, and Egypt, as well as numerous other places, and people were generally terrified of them. There is a scene depicted in Medinet Habu of an ancient battle between the Egyptians and these sea people, and an inscription by Ramesses II that reads, "The unruly Sherdon, whom no one had ever known how to combat. They came boldly sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea, none being able to withstand them." So they were very skilled, very numerous, very powerful, and were apparently all unified. So you'd think they would form some sort of great country or something, but no, they just seem to fade away apparently as quickly as they appeared. They might have been desperate migrants or mercenaries or pirates, and might have come from Central Europe or Southern Europe or Northern Africa or the Mediterranean islands or Western Turkey or literally almost anywhere else. As like I said before, very little is actually known about them. So a super cool one to dive into, especially if you're into this type of stuff and you've got the time. I would recommend checking out a documentary or two about them, as all this stuff is really quite fascinating. Tier 9, the giant cannibal shark. So this is something we actually covered earlier in the Iceberg. This refers to the 2003 Great White Incident, where a 9-foot great white shark was tagged and then seemingly attacked and eaten whole, with its tracker washing up on shore. Well, on that entry there were a few different theories about what the creature might be. Giant squid, megalodon, huge sea creatures, killer whales. But this theory refers to the attacker being a giant cannibal white shark. And I won't really go into too much details on this one, as we did literally cover this a little bit earlier on, but the basic idea was that the attacker was this giant shark that either was just really big or suffered from something like gigantism, or was even something like a megalodon. And honestly, the idea of a 9-foot great white shark being thrown around and ragdolled and eaten whole by some bigger creature is just a thing of nightmares. Unidentified Sagami Bay creature. So this was a creature found while exploring the depths of Sagami Bay. It doesn't really move on the video, which has led some people to assume or think that it's either a rock or a fossil or a spawn of some kind, or that the creature is just keeping really still, maybe as a defense mechanism, which is not unheard of. It looks a bit like a giant frog or a strange whale sort of thing, but the jury seems to be kind of out on this one, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Bimini Road. So this is this fascinating, quite beautiful actually, underwater structure that kind of resembles a road, hence Bimini Road. It is located in Bimini, a island off the coast of Miami, and it is formed from these some large, some not so large, rectangular limestone blocks. It was discovered in 1968, and since then, obviously, lots and lots of theories have arisen, essentially, about the road's origins, and perhaps even where it leads, if it leads anywhere at all. So because it's in this general area, it leading to Atlantis was obviously theorized. However, there's not much, if any, evidence for that, outside of just pure speculation. And then there were theories about the road not leading anywhere in particular, but just being an ancient road around the area of Bimini from some ancient lost civilization, or maybe these being like parts of buried temples or buildings or something. One historian claims that the Chinese Zheng He fleet, which was attempting to travel around the world in the 1420s, got caught up in a hurricane near Bimini, and so they had to land, and they actually built this road in order to use it as sort of like a ramp to pull up damaged ships from the ocean, and then they repaired them and then went on their way around the world, which is a really fun, cool theory, I think, that if it hasn't already been created, I think someone should definitely write a story about that. But whatever it is, whether it's natural or man-made, it is still a super interesting find. Call of the Deep. This is a somewhat terrifying, somewhat mysterious, somewhat explained phenomenon, and it happens when people dive down into the ocean, and after a while of being down there, there's this feeling that they get, this calling, if you will, where they feel this inexplicable urge to just keep diving deeper and deeper. And then they, of course, drown. Apparently, sometimes when other people try to grab them or save them, the one who is entranced just breaks free, brushes them off, and just continues to dive deeper. And there are accounts of people actually trying to remove their headgear, like their breathing apparatus, and to just offer them to a nearby fish, which I think they are fine. They can breathe just perfectly fine. They don't need this breathing apparatus. And one account said that one of his diving buddies would sometimes get this feeling and actually want to return to the surface. But while he was down there, his messed up, warped mind thought that in order to get back to the surface, he had to keep diving deeper and kind of loop around the earth back up to the top. So there's probably a bit of like disorientation going on there. It has been linked to something called nitrogen narcosis, which is basically what happens when you breathe in gases in a greater than normal pressure environment, like when deep sea diving. You know, you go down and after a while you start to feel drowsy, a little disoriented, and even kind of blissful and euphoric. It's kind of similar to being drunk in a few ways, which is probably why it's sometimes called the martini effect, an absolutely terrifying effect, phenomenon, in obviously the Earth's most terrifying place, the ocean. And there are ideas and theories about this being kind of supernatural maybe, or of a giant deep sea creature sending out signals to kind of entrance people and lure them down there. But the idea of just zoning out, running out of oxygen, and purposefully diving deeper and deeper into the cold, dark unknown is just, my god, that is a terrifying thought. And that is all we have time for. I had a ton of fun and fear doing this one, as I've wanted to explore stuff like this for quite a while, and honestly, this iceberg for me didn't disappoint. And I just hope that you didn't watch it while you were on a boat or something, as that would be very, very brave. I really hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and as always, thanks for watching.